we call a blackboard,
just
which
gonna
is
go
the board you
grab-
write on. It's also
Brady.
their computer. So
Oh,
as he was writing
Okay.
on it, it went into his computer. It's just like, that's so cool.
In the new highway department?
Highway department, yeah.
The new one?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. I didn't even realize they color coded everything, you know, for times and, yeah,
Do we erase things and change them?
Yeah.
Go-
yeah.
You know, if we put that in here, we'd get hate mail about wasting money.
Well,
Everybody has to learn how to use things before you can.
Oh, no joke.
That would be the one thing.
That's like on my iPad, when I use the pen, I can write notes on PDFs, and I found out when I send out the notes to
Morning,
clients,
Bob.
anything that I write, the notation doesn't go. Yeah,
Glad
they
we
sent
can
me some,
talk
fill it in,
yesterday.
so I filled it in, and then she's like.
Some info in there, and then I guess if you
Still
guys
in their
have
office, and I showed her
questions,
my
I
iPad,
think a
like,
lot of it will be referred to in these.
Thank you.
Yep.
Whoa! What's on top of that house?
That's the Eagles.
thank you.
Yeah, for some old rules. Eagles nest in Tuscany.
What?
Eagles nest in Tuscany. Looks like a castle, like you're gonna,
It does, doesn't it?
it's a hunting shack.
It looks pretty cool.
I'd sit up there with my ammunition and weaponry, waiting for the people to come in.
So Brady and Molly are both on their way. I think we can go ahead in the interest of time, Myron. I don't know if you want to.
No, I think Commissioner Bashad, Bashad's not going to be here.
I reached out to him a couple times and he didn't give me a definitive answer, so
Okay.
my assumption is no.
Okay.
That he's got something else going on.
Sure, well, I'll just say hello to everyone again, and I'll turn it over to Lena to facilitate, and hopefully we've got a lot of information here that we can ponder and hopefully get some kind of agreement and compromise going forward, so it could go to the board hopefully at some point.
Maybe Tuesday. That would be.
Well, it'd be the nice goal, good goal, but let's wait till the end of the meeting.
I can still get on the agenda for Tuesday, right?
I can get it on the agenda.
Okay, because I know April is out.
No, she'll be able to, she hasn't posted the agenda yet. I asked her
Okay.
this morning, yeah, she's got the flu.
Right.
So to wait and see if we, after this meeting, to see if we would have something to put on the agenda.
I've got to put something on for scheduling the county board of appeals,
Okay.
so we got to get that scheduled.
You still have time till noon today.
Okay.
All right. Well, good morning. I printed out, I think I sent this to you all as well, but I printed a copy in case you didn't print one. This is basically a summary of what we did last time, which I feel is not finalized yet. It's still kind of a working copy. That's what David put out there. Thank you for doing that, David.
You're very welcome.
So on the one side, we have the whereases, and on the other side, we have the things that we came up with that we said were important to us. So I just want to add kind of maybe one more thing to think about in that as we try to get to something more agreement or final decision. In 2014, in a tax court case that probably most of you are familiar with, I'm kind of new to this game, the Department of Revenue listened to a case about short-term rental and fell on the side of commercial classification for that. Our assessor's office saw that, noted it, and worried about it because of all the things we've talked about here. That if our short-term rental classifications were to turn over to all to commercial, that would have an effect, a devastating effect on our housing, our lodging here, and we all know that. And I think that it's important for us to always say as one other goal that we have is that we're trying to put together something that avoids that at all costs. There's sort of a minimum thing. You know, we know that we're asking for a short-term rental classification, something that makes it a little easier and more consistent across counties than what we have now, where the Department of Revenue said, yeah, commercial, and you all figure out what that means. We know that creates inconsistencies even between ourselves and our neighboring county. That's not an acceptable solution. And so we're trying to drive to an acceptable solution that's not that, that's not commercial, but that recognizes that there is some, and I'm going to use it in quotes, commercial element in this, that there is that. So it needs to be in between somewhere, and that's what we're driving to. I just wanted to, because we haven't met for a few days, just level set that conversation again. And also, in my opinion, and like I said, I'm kind of new to this, but our assessor's office all along, by the actions they took, were trying to avoid that classification of getting there, of getting us into tax court where it would be deemed as commercial or other things. That was the whole purpose of the 183-day distinction. We were trying to avoid that and avoid that impact. So I feel a need as the interim to talk about our actions at the county and say, you know, we're on the same team here. We want to find a solution. Yes.
As well as going from seasonal rec to residential non-homestead. That was another attempt to
Right. Right. So
fit it.
Right. So I think, you know, whether it got us here or whether it was the right decisions or whatever, I think it's important to recognize that the intent has always been the same and trying to find that. So if the discussion should get heated, I have no reason to believe that it should, but if it should get heated, we need to understand that players at this table are all having the same intent of trying to find a solution that's not, doesn't throw one party here at the table under the bus. Because I don't believe that that's ever been true. So, done with my mother lecture of the day. Okay, so this is what I'm going to propose for today, which will be a little different than last time, is I would like, first of all, to review what we talked about last time, the whereases, just to make sure that we have all of them we want and to make sure they make sense. And I'm going to give you an example so that you can look for one that I would like to see tweaked a little bit. It's, let's see, where was it? I should have written this down as a note. It's the fifth one down, whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue has given county assessors wide latitude in determining primary use. It's kind of a so what right there.
I don't see the purpose of it there.
Well, right there, I would add to that and say, which has created inconsistencies across counties in how these are classified and has led to some unfairness, taxation across the state or something of that nature. So I'm looking at each of these to say, does it lead to something else or have we left something dangling? I want to go through the agenda first. So that was an example of that one.
Okay.
Do you have a
No,
question
go
about
ahead
that?
for the agenda. Now, when we get to the point
Right.
of just considering a little bit different language, that's my
Okay.
concern with
Yep,
the first
that's why we're going to
statement.
go through those.
Yeah, okay.
So the next thing I'd like to do, because right at the end of the last meeting, Jim, you said you haven't seen the whole proposal.
The what?
The whole proposal. We haven't talked about the whole proposal. And you, from the chamber, and you started talking about the state tax and some other things. So I would like you to explain what you think is the ideal proposal. Without discussion, just explain it to us so that we can understand what your proposal is. And then at that point, what I would really like to do, and this is kind of, because we are trying to work on something that the board can support, and that it's input from our assessor and from the chamber, I would like to just have a board discussion at that point, and have the board discuss your proposal and everything else they've heard, and see if they can come up with language they support, whether it's yours or whether it's some modification. So that's, and then you and Bob are subject matter experts that can answer questions, not argue points at that point, but answer questions about what your intent is or how that might work. I'm looking for some general agreement that this is an okay process.
Works for me.
Okay.
I would like an opportunity to do what you did, though, and update you on what's been going on in our world since
Okay.
we last met.
Fair enough?
Also, I think we need 3 more copies of this for,
I have a couple more.
okay, Jim, Linda, and Molly, and,
Do you want to go make some more copies?
I have enough.
oh, sweet.
Yeah, so this is the information that I got back for, requested from board members, attorney, so on.
And we don't need a copy of the agenda, right? We're just gonna
Nope,
go,
nope,
okay.
I just write it down
Thank
so
you.
I remember it.
Mhm.
basically. Okay, so Jim, you were going to give us an update on what's been going on in your world?
Yeah, so, Judy Erickson is our representative in St. Paul, and she's been talking to people in the state, the statewide interest groups that have some interest in this right along. She reports that they are most interested in getting their hands on a starting proposal they can work on, which is, she said, and they're all looking to us, so we're playing an important role here, but we also recognize that once they get their hands on it, it's probably going to change somewhat. She also bumped into yesterday the committee assistant for the Senate Tax Committee, who also said he was quite eager to work with us on this issue. It's apparently been a source of great pre-session chatter in St. Paul. Everyone she's talked to was quite open to considering exempting this class from the state general tax. They didn't have any great concern with that. They're interested in our proposal, they want to work on it, and they were encouraging, basically. So there was no tremendous red flags that have developed. She also has, Judy has arranged a short visit with Susan Kent, the new minority leader in the Senate, for February 18th. It will be, Judy and I will be visiting with her to brief her as briefly on this issue and our interest in it, and explain where we're coming from. We'll also be meeting while I'm there with Bach again and a couple of the other legislative leaders in a tax run. So there's been a lot going on. It's all been basically positive that people are looking to us to provide something that a great many interested parties can work on through this session. And I think everybody's realizing that although it's a short session in an election year, which creates 2 huge hurdles, that is something that really does need to be brought to an end in this session. There needs to be some result, because as you point out, really, that we're so all over the map, and you have your own 183-day test that you don't really want to be implemented. And so that really pretty well dictates that there be a solution this year. So that's, we're going to be talking again after this meeting and doing some other things on how to go forward, but that's where we are.
Okay. Fair enough. So you want to walk through what your resolution was putting forward with the board, and help us understand what you had there?
Yeah, I'm
Just
not
as
sure.
as a point of review.
I don't recall my statement at the end of the last meeting that we had heard everything. Did I?
No, I don't recall.
Well,
Rewind the tape.
It's hour and 36 minutes.
You had made the comment that the board hadn't really heard your full proposal yet. And it was like pushed into the last 10 minutes of the meeting. And that's the first time that the board and myself had heard about this, other than reading it ourselves here. The changes in the tax, the local, some going to swapping out the local and short term. So we just like to understand, have you talked to that a little bit? Here's a copy of your resolution. It's marked up with her.
Well, this would strike me as strange. We're here.
Well,
Why would we go
we're
back
here,
to here?
but I would point this out, and you don't have to if you want, we
Yeah,
can just
no.
go into discussion.
I'm just trying to understand what's happening.
Well, I wanted to have a more I wanted you to have a more thorough opportunity to talk about what was actually in your resolution, if you want to. You don't have to. Because I felt like it was sort of rushed at the end. I don't know how other people feel about that. If you feel like you understand it, then we're good. I was just trying to make sure.
I don't know if anyone else did though.
Yeah, to this point, I feel like
Okay.
we may not be on the same page, but we're on a similar page with what
Okay.
we've worked on. If you see value in going back to the original, I think that might stir the pot.
Yeah, no, I don't see any value to that.
Okay.
We're all pretty much on the same page. I have a couple things that I'd like to mention that go along the lines of what Rena talked about with the fifth paragraph. There are a couple of other tweaks I'd like to propose to this, but otherwise.
Okay, well, why don't we take what we were gonna do then and start at the top, go through the whereases, make sure that we're comfortable with the language or do the wordsmithing, add things or do what we're gonna do to that, and then we'll get down to what our actual proposal is. And let's do that. So starting with the first one, whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue's memo has created uncertainty in the short-term rental market.
You might want to.
Could I-
insert May 1, May
Yeah.
21st.
That was my
And we can
suggestion.
also add the title of the memo, which I think is
Okay.
classifying short-term rental property.
Will you-
21st.
Will you keep up with us on that, Molly?
Sure.
Because you're really good at that stuff, okay.
Always helps to compliment.
It's a sandwich, compliment, duty, and compliment.
She loves her public service responsibilities. I've seen her print that on her website. So, okay, whereas the short-term rental market is a significant part of Cook County's tourism economy.
That's true.
Standalone?
That's true.
Whereas tourism is the single largest part of Cook County's economy.
Can I ask about those two statements taken together?
Sure.
Do they adequately express that we are indeed unique in Minnesota? As a journalist, I was taught you never use that word unique, but I think it applies here. And I don't think any other county has, we know we have the highest percentage, certainly not the highest absolute number, but the highest percentage of seasonal rec homes. And I would submit from that probably the very highest percentage of short-term rentals as a percentage, not as a number.
Oh, I
Growing-
think that's a number too.
No, Crow Wing County has more than 10,000, and we don't.
Really?
Yeah, oh yeah. They're huge compared to us. We're actually a small player in terms of absolute numbers.
So,
But we also have there is no county in Minnesota whose economy is so dedicated to one sector, like tourism. So I just want to make certain those two statements fully reflect that we really, this is a bigger deal for us than for anyone
Right.
else in the state.
so I'm gonna push you on David's criteria up there, number 4, data-driven. Do you have specific numbers we can stick in there? Rather than just say, it is the most significant, or we're far and away, do we have?
The last firm numbers we could go back to would be the GO team study for economy,
For the economy, it's more than 80% in the GO team's estimation, which is
2013.
tourism as a percentage of the Cook County economy.
And that was 2012 and 13. It was finalized in 13.
The percentage of short-term rentals, could you just say per capita, would that be more?
No,
I think the
percentage
80%
captures per capita.
of tourism is the right word to use.
What was that?
How
I
about
think that
Cook
you-
County stands out as the community most reliant on tourism in its economy?
Yeah.
Across the
That would
state,
be-
and then parentheses in excess of 80%.
But that would be
That
fine.
would be great.
Can you say that once more, please?
It needs to be reworded,
Mhm.
but Cook County stands out as the community most reliant upon tourism for its economy in the state, in excess of 80%.
Yeah, so 80% earlier.
Or something slightly better.
And I don't have data that would establish that we have the highest percentage of short-term rentals. The data on us having the highest percentage of seasonal recreational properties is well established as somewhere in there between 50 and 60 as the highest percentage in the state.
Is that, I'm gonna ask the assessor, because.
It's been changing. I mean, we changed a whole bunch of vacant land and then the vacation rentals, so depending on what year you pinpoint. I know the Department of Revenue has up-to-date info up to 2016 for every county in the state that you could get those specifics, but it
Yeah.
would take some research.
Yeah. I haven't looked at that research lately.
I just don't wanna overstate our case,
Yeah,
in
I
case
just don't want
another
to-
county disputes it, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, Heidi?
And even though, like, if Crow Wing has way more percentage of vacation rentals than us, they have a more diverse economy. The important statement is that our economy is tourism.
No, I think, yeah, that's an important, certainly an important piece of that, and the diverse part is very important. But also stating the percentage of property owners that are affected is probably.
Everybody's affected by this decision.
I'd be
We
willing to
should-
put money on that Cook County has the highest percentage of their total real estate value in short-term rentals is 10%. That's pretty high.
And you have that from the 2016 numbers?
Actually, it's just from my list based on, we have a overall market value of like 1.6 million, almost 1.7.
Yeah, you've got that
Could
after
we-
this.
Even if we could then, based on that, if we could find a word that is a little bit more emphatic than significant, I'd be happy with that. So,
Could it, I mean,
critical,
I'm sorry?
critical, whereas the short-term rental market is a critical part.
Does anyone
Yes,
contest those?
Critical?
Benefits?
instead of significant?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was, what I was gonna say is, I wanna try to keep it as,
You were gonna say that, so I got it from you.
well done. No, I wasn't gonna say, yeah, yeah. Pulled it from the
It's
back
a
of
mind
my.
melt.
I'll try to do that during the Easter. You suck all into his thoughts.
Well, all I was gonna say is I wanna try to keep it as simple as possible, like thus far, it's been pretty simple and straightforward, and changing it to critical, if that,
That does it for me.
yeah, versus
Yeah.
going into
Yeah.
percentages, and
Mhm.
I don't know if we need to get into comparisons with other counties, I don't, I feel like that muddles things.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep, but I don't wanna make sweeping statements about being the most or whatever if we don't have data to back it
Right,
up.
right.
Yeah.
Apparently we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so. Okay, let's see. Whereas the current Minnesota, no, wait a minute. Whereas the current Minnesota property tax system did not contemplate the short-term rental of residential properties.
I would like to add one word to that. And this is my concern about the fact that the condos and townhomes at places like Bluefin have existed in this tax classification for half a century, did not fully contemplate, just the term fully. We didn't contemplate that cabins and standalone homes would become VRBOs and Airbnb and all this. We really didn't. But it's not the case that it didn't to some degree. I don't know what the history is, but I've checked with Dennis Ristoff, who's been in this since the beginning, and they've always been at this tax rate. It's what was assigned them. It wasn't that they asked for it. So at some place way back in the dawning of this condominium type resort arrangement, the Department of Revenue decided that they should be taxed at this rate. And I think it was probably because the economics of the construction of these kinds of units and the relationship to a resort suggested that the economics allowed for that was a reasonable thing. So fully leaves open the possibility that they did anticipate these condos and things, since they've been around for a very long time.
Okay.
Sure.
The only thing I would ask about that is, the current clause says of residential properties, and what you're saying is some of these condos were considered residential when they were determining?
They're residential now.
Oh, okay, okay,
They're used by their owners.
sure,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue has given county assessors wide latitude in determining primary use, and this is the one I was hoping we could.
I added these words, which has led to inconsistent practices in classifying properties used for short-term rental across the state.
Terrific.
Yeah. So it's really, this is the case of unequal taxation,
Mhm.
right? Just a kind of a primary fundamental idea of assessment taxation.
And I took out the possessive apostrophe in assessors.
Thank you.
Don't.
We have an apostrophe problem in the county, I'm pretty sure we do. Okay, whereas the county board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners. County board, that's what you wish for, right?
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
All right. Whereas the county board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce, which is true.
Can I make a suggestion if it
No.
It doesn't work, but would you mind inserting after, whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners, could you include a phrase where it says, whereas the Cook County Board recognizes that the Cook County Chamber of Commerce also wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners?
Maybe you just add the Cook County Board and the Cook County Chamber of Commerce wishes to find a solution into one class, so we don't have a
That would be
separate
helpful.
But
whereas.
it's the board who's issuing the resolution.
Well, how about we switch the two around? Switch, whereas the Cook County Board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce, and then whereas the Cook County Board and the Cook County Chamber of Commerce wish to find a solution that is
I'm
fair.
more comfortable with that.
Just swap order and then add?
That would be okay, except for, I think Molly may have a point, that this is your resolution.
Yes.
So it may require that you recognize rather than that just a statement that they both are for.
Right.
So change the order and use the word recognize.
Yeah.
Where-
Thank you.
Recognizes.
There we go.
Where is recognized?
Recognizes that the chamber is working for that.
Okay, listen to this. So we start with, whereas the Cook County Board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce. Whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners and recognizes that the Cook County Chamber has the same goal.
Good.
Very nice.
Could I just add one thing for thought? I mean, instead of wishes to find a solution on that county board wishes to find it, could it be a resolution rather than a solution? Because we're repeating solution. Or a
Solution,
proposal.
resolution.
She used
Or proposal.
solution and then goal. She didn't repeat solution.
Can you
Well, in
read
the
it
two
again?
different clauses, I think.
Can you read it
That-
again?
yeah, that's used twice.
Leslie, here you
First recital. Whereas the Cook County Board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce. Whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners and recognizes that the Cook County Chamber has the same goal.
Solutions.
So what's wrong with having solution?
Okay, all right. I just think that it's used in a different context in each place, and, but it's
What
just
about
maybe
the
one of my
first-
quirks. So find a resolution for the first statement, which would reflect a solution. That's my thinking.
I understand where Myron's coming from, so the Cook County Board has worked on a resolution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce, because we are working on a
I think
resolution.
there's confusion there, though, or
Okay.
you could confuse the
We
meaning of
both
resolution
conceded.
to be the resolution.
This is a resolution and then-
I'm glad this is being recorded because Myron and I agreed, and we also agreed to concede.
So noted.
I think we should all just take a moment and reflect on that.
Wow, it'd be a great day.
It is.
Better
It's a
go.
new dawning day in Cook County right now.
All
I'm-
right, so
I'm
maybe I do
pleased.
just took thesaurus, the word solution.
Sure, yeah, let's see what we got.
It's just repetitive to me.
But it's
I like
saying-
repetition in
Because
a
we want a
resolution.
solution.
I was
It just
gonna
hits
say,
it harder
The solution.
and keeps it simple.
The word resolution in my head then confuses it with the word, trying to put forward a resolution,
Right.
which is a different use of it, so.
Yeah, okay.
That confused me too, so.
Okay.
I don't mind changing solution, but I don't think resolution is the right.
Yeah,
word.
what is the thesaurus?
So, so it says,
Get into a
answer
non-verb thing.
is
then.
a synonym. Key result.
Hmm.
Yeah, we'll leave it.
Let's leave it for now. I think it's okay.
I was trying to think of a synonym too.
All right. So
We
now,
could change it to demands, we demand them.
is there, I'm just gonna ask this question, and I think we're good, but is there any whereas that we left out? Is there any other point that anybody feels is important to make before we get to a solution? And we can back into that later. Depending on the solution, we need something else up there to support it. But at this point, are you guys good with the whereases?
Yeah, we were trying to limit whereases and.
Right. I just love that plural, whereases. I want to know how to spell it.
You could say recitals.
Apostrophe, yes.
That's what they're called. They're called
I like
recitals.
whereases better. I'm just saying, Molly.
So they're not clauses, they're recitals?
It's, these are
Whereases.
these are the recitals that.
Okay.
They all start with whereas.
Just like the term whereases. I just don't know how to spell it.
If you say it enough, it will be a word.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm hoping. And then it'll be coined to me and it'll be great. Okay, so starting with the first therefore, the significance of short-term residential rental properties requires a separate class of taxation. That's why we're here, right?
I actually have something I would suggest.
Okay?
Therefore, the Cook County Board has determined that the significance of short-term rental properties requires a separate class of taxation. So that they are, you're doing the determining.
Okay,
That's more accurate.
you got that, Mom?
I think so. You didn't change anything other than just adding the Cook County Board.
Yeah.
Everybody else good with that statement?
Mhm.
Good.
That's why we're here, right? We're asking them to create a separate class of taxation. All right, the next one, therefore, short-term residential rentals are defined as properties rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days, are advertised as a short-term rental in the previous year, and have fewer than 3, and we weren't sure about 4 units. Do we, is this a place, do we need the term in there, mixed use anywhere, or not?
We talked about that at our last meeting, and I thought had agreed that it would added an unnecessary complexity and confusion.
So,
Can I ask a question on this one? We talked about it, but I've been hearing something with the people in the community, and some of them are saying 1 or 2, why 3 or 4? So I'm trying to seek some better understanding of why we would say 3 or 4.
Less than 3
We
is
said
1 or
less
2.
than 3.
So
That means 1 or 2, basically. But I would suggest that this is a technical question. I don't honestly know if it's necessary to have more than 2, but I think it's a technical question that will be best resolved in St. Paul. So if we leave it at less than 3, I think we're fine.
Oh, okay, fewer than 3. There's a question mark.
Or
Yeah,
fewer than
yeah,
2
yeah.
than 3.
right.
Yeah.
I have,
Agree to take the 4
So
off now?
Bob, what do you?
I have a little input on it. Normally they say like 1 to 2 units, they don't say less than 3 in the classifications, but the 4C1 class, which we're kind of creating a cousin of, is for 3 units and above, so that has been addressed. And essentially what they're saying is that if you have 3 rental units rented short-term and you meet all these criteria, then you're a resort. But if you don't meet all those criteria, then you're commercial. That's what if you have 3 units and you're up the Gunflint Trail, you're not likely gonna meet that seasonal resort classification unless you provide recreational activities and all the statutory language. So what they're saying is that either, at 3 units, either you're a seasonal resort or commercial. So I think the 1 to 2 is like the safe boat to be in, where it doesn't have that overlap. And when you look at it, you know, like 4B and 4BB1, you know, it's 1 to 3 and then 4 plus, so they always, whenever you're having relating or cousin classes, one addresses the 1 to 2 units and the other one addresses 3 plus.
So so the suggestion is to change it 1 to 2 instead of
Yeah,
few
I would,
percent?
yeah, I would say, you know.
So there's no overlap?
Right, 1 to 2 units.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, again, I remain unsure.
That may be.
I want to see, I would like to see, for example, Todd Miller's place, if there's some reason that he doesn't fall into this seasonal resort. I think that it would be a huge blow to him, probably uneconomic, to fall into commercial, and so.
Although we shouldn't be creating,
Hmm?
we
Anything.
shouldn't be creating anything specifically
Specifically
for
for
a
a-
property.
No, I was using that as an
As an
example, no, as an example of why I thought, at the last meeting that 1 to 3 would be better than 1 or 2. But
When we have overlap and confusion, and this has to fit for the entire state, so I say 1 to 2.
the overlap doesn't bother me, because he gets to determine.
No,
There's
no, no.
other counties involved.
Yeah, I think that one of our goals was trying to make this as simple as possible for the assessment community. So less arbitrary, less decision-making. This is the line right here, and I think is
Absolutely,
one of
because
our.
right now it's arbitrary.
That would be, you know, then it leaves it up to the assessor, and you're gonna get inconsistent results again. So that's the reason I would go away from it.
Can you please kind of go into a little bit more about those other criteria for resorts?
Yeah, so like, there was a special provision created, the seasonal resort, I think, started in the early 2000s. And it basically said you had to have 60% of your bookings for 2 consecutive nights or more, and 40% of your gross lodging receipts have to come from 90 days of business. Those are the 2 main criteria, and then there's this other, part of the aspect is if you don't have recreational activities on site, then you have to have that element of the 60, the 2 consecutive nights booked on 60% or more of the bookings. But the special provision said if you're in a township with a population under 2,500 and a state-administered DNR trail, you don't have to have recreational activities if you're under 20 units. So it's like the
That wasn't
longest
made
part of
for
the
us.
statute.
Yeah.
So
You ought to see this, that it's like that much type, agate size type of all the things.
and then there's like, you have to meet either 1 or 2, and then in 1 there's A or B, so it's like, it's really complex, but essentially anything from Grand Marais down to the western county line has a DNR trail running through, and the population's under 2,500. So only east of town and up the Gunflint those 3 units wouldn't fit unless they provide the recreational activities
Horseshoes.
on site. Well, they actually list specific things like snowmobile rentals, boat rentals, kayaks, skis, downhill cross-country.
Oh.
Cross-country skis seem to be the easiest recreational
Sure.
activity to
Yeah.
put into your establishment to meet the
Yeah.
definition, but,
And/or kayaks are pretty.
Well, it would really still be a shame if you had a place in Grand Marais with 3 units, that because of the Gitchigami Trail qualifies for the seasonal resort, and you've got a similar sized place up the trail that doesn't, that's a worry, but,
that's where they would have to provide the recreational
that's,
activities.
or the 2-day thing.
And I think that when they made that statute, there was a big committee that sat and looked and worked on it, and they came up with what they figured was that, hey, you either meet this and you're a seasonal resort, if you don't meet this, you're commercial. And I mean, that was, I think, a 2007 report called the Assessment Classification Report of Resorts.
I think we're okay, one or 2, and then recognizing this is gonna be a source of great discussion at a higher level, a higher pay grade.
So this is our best recommendation. This is what we feel meets our criteria. So, all right, 1 to 2. I just threw this up here as we get into our definition of what is a short-term rental. Last week, we had some conversation that at least a county in Hawaii had recently gone through the same thing. and Mary Somnus brought this up to me. She looked it up, and this was their definition that they came to. So I just put it up there as, you know, opportunity for us to look at the wording we had and compare it. And,
Well, this has the, for me, this has the increased value of not specifying a number.
Mhm.
If that becomes necessary, if the Department of Revenue
Right.
says, great, then fine, but the more general, the better.
I thought it was kind of interesting, I wasn't even looking at that piece, because we certainly don't necessarily want to adopt this. I was looking at other words they used. I like the words dwellings as well, homes or condos, because, I don't know, how does this affect things like yurts that people rent on
That's a dwelling.
short-term, you know? So
think
using,
under the-
using,
Even a boat's a dwelling.
Using-
I'd like to
using-
find out to give it-
you know, does that expand it too much? Does it encompass what it should be? I'm just wondering.
A dwelling is any what structure intended for human habitation.
That sounds
That
accurate
seems
to
like
me.
a pretty large scope.
Is
And
it-
we are
is it-
updating the land use guide, we specifically left specific language out to make it. That way, if you had a spaceship that landed, you wouldn't have to figure out what you call your spaceship. Any habitable structure is what we changed the language to. Any habitable structure needs a septic treatment.
Do you want to
plant.
say dwellings and spaceships then?
No.
To make sure that.
Well-
No, because then we won't be taken seriously in St. Paul.
Looking at our,
Sorry, I didn't mean to, I just thought, well, there's some other words here we might want to.
looking at our recital,
Goodies.
I almost
One
said
person
recital.
over.
Looking,
At least you didn't say
Be careful,
rental.
you could really get it.
what, is that something? Is that a?
No.
Okay.
You could go on to something else and.
But I thought that instead of properties, it could say dwellings? Is that where we're going?
Or residential in front of properties.
Because the whole boat thing suddenly triggered like, oh, we have a harbor and houseboat potential.
People are
And-
renting out boats and campers that are parked
Right.
on state land.
Right.
We can just take residential out, short-term rentals.
Well, there's no property tax on a boat. in Hardwick.
Yep, so maybe we want to limit the
But
scope
if they pull the
then.
boat out of the harbor and put it, there's still no tax on it.
Doesn't residential
Fire
say
registration,
all of
property
that?
taxes.
Reside?
What if we take the word residential and just say short-term rentals are
I didn't mean to open a can of worms. I was trying to
I-
get to our scope.
Well, I
But
think that
I'm
fits
wondering
our-
if boats don't work because we don't actually tax them, you know, we don't assess them that way, then maybe it's a moot point.
I think
And we should just go
residential's-
back to the residential piece.
Yeah, I think residential is key to have it in there. If you look at that rate, the class rate sheet that Jim printed out with all the yellow highlights, almost everyone, it's either defined as residential or non-residential. In fact, if you look at the 4C1 class, it says seasonal, recreational, residential, commercial, you know, so it's gonna be similar to that, but 1 to 2 units. And I think this is the type of specifics that tax, or the tax committee, property tax committee, whatever it is, they'll probably go through.
They'll
and
flesh it
fine
out.
tune.
One phrase from that I really did like though was per tenant. Fewer than, or less than 30 consecutive days per tenant. I thought that was kind of a good conclusion. I don't know.
I like that too.
Why?
I don't know.
Well, what if you get the situation where somebody rented it for 3 months to one person and then short-term the rest of the year? I mean,
That's where you earn the big bucks.
that's primary use determination.
And that
So
could
are you,
happen.
what, I don't understand.
I don't know if you need to get down to the specific of per tenant. I think you just say rented for, advertised or rented for periods of shorter than 30 days.
Now, ours says advertised the year before. Is that,
Year preceding.
they
the
haven't
assessment.
done that. Do we need to, is that an important piece of ours?
Yeah, like I say, I think that, yeah, I think it is important if you look at the end of the 4C1 class, which is the really long one, it does say the year preceding the assessment, and, you know, they make a declaration to the assessor, but I think that, what we're trying to cover is that there is no declaration, there's no determining factors, that if we found it advertised, it's this class. You know,
Right now, there isn't.
right?
And so you want to add that in. I was
Yeah,
just
and
wondering
and
about the
we would
preceding
definitely be
year
looking
piece.
back at the previous year, because obviously you can't change things after January 2nd. I mean, you can for a certain amount of time, but
So I made a little change to Dave's language based on what you just said. So the term, the year preceding the assessment is used elsewhere?
yep.
Okay, so I would suggest that instead of saying in the previous year, we say advertised as a short-term rental in the year preceding the assessment.
The
Be
assessment date.
consistent.
Yeah, sounds good.
So you have to add the date, assessment date at the end.
Okay.
Again, though, I'm still wondering about properties versus dwellings. I think dwellings, I think that would cover us better. Because if you, well, I don't know, maybe not.
I have a question before I decide what I think about that, which is that when you tax is it the entire property that is affected by the classification of the dwelling, or, could the property
Yes. it
around?
can.
Split.
around
Split
the
tax.
That's, it brings up an interesting point. So like, you know, if there's one structure on the land and that's rented short-term, everything would go commercial. If you have a house and a cabin, and they're only renting the cabin, then we apportion that to the special class. So, to answer your question, that yes, the dwelling does affect the entire property, like how it's used is gonna be the classification,
But
whether it's cabin.
Can I ask a question about that, though? Let's take a specific example. The Tire and Auto Lodge. There's an apartment above it where Craig used to live. I don't know who lives there now. But that was classified as residential.
It's got both. It's got commercial on the main level.
That was my point.
Yeah.
That you,
You can split it.
Perfect example.
is that you have two classifications on one building.
Right.
That,
So that's possible, so we
Yep.
should.
Absolutely. Judy Erickson and her husband run an apple orchard. She uses a piece of her home, about 5,000 square feet, to sell apple products each fall. Those square feet are classified commercial. So the rest, it's in her home, but it's still that piece of it.
It's the same thing with 1010 Interiors, it has a residence behind it,
Yeah.
commercial.
So am I thinking about this if I'm thinking about this in the right way, then we should say dwelling instead of property? You guys-
I don't know if it even really makes a big difference in the end. I think assessors are gonna interpret the exact same way, and I think that the tax committee down in St. Paul will fine tune it if it needs to be. I really do. I don't think I think if you look at, you know, the definitions, they're quite vague in some of them. You know, like residential non-homestead, there's a couple different ones, but, you know, they typically say like residential non-homestead 1 to 3 units. That's all it says. And then in the Department of Revenue's tax manual, the property tax administrator's manual, it goes into depth and says typically a residential structure used for nothing or somebody's primary residence. So,
And then there's 4C1, where it's an entire page of the actual statute.
Mhm.
So instead of beating this to death, can we just have the commissioners raise their hand for which one they want? Who wants properties? Who wants dwelling?
What do you want to
Who
do?
can raise your
Yeah.
Silence is consent.
For me.
Yeah. No, I'm neutral. I think that can be determined.
and I don't know if it's worth
We
splitting
can't
hairs
have
over.
neutral, or we're gonna be here till tomorrow.
I don't know if it's worth splitting hairs over. I mean, technically, it might have
That's
some
why I wanted their
significance,
votes,
but
so
to
we
an
can move down
assessor, they're gonna know
the
what to do.
Yeah, you'd have to define split class.
Okay, here's an idea. We have the word residential only in how we've titled the class. So we want the legislature to create a new tax classification for short-term residential rentals, defined as, and after the word's defined as, we don't say anything about residential. We probably do want to say residential in that definition language, and/or dwelling, because dwelling is.
So started out
Can I-
with, or
can-
defined as
Residential
residential
property.
properties.
Right, yeah.
Just for the sake of it, Judy is watching, she says she can't find a legal definition of dwelling in the state statute, and that's where its properties has. And
Yeah.
So that would
That's
involve
valuable.
us coming up with a statutory definition for dwelling.
That's valuable. That's
I
valuable.
think they have it in other-
Commonly
yeah,
used
but
in
county
assessment is
ordinance.
Yeah.
It's not in state.
Is what?
Units is commonly used.
Residential units,
Oh, that would-
that's, I like that.
Instead of
That-
properties.
All right.
Residential unit, perfect.
Thank you.
Stick it with the lingo.
So I made another change, which is instead of, what were we saying? Therefore, short-term residential residential rentals defined as, I said, therefore, the legislature should create a new tax classification for short-term residential rentals, defined as
Okay.
residential units rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days, advertised as a short-term rental in the year preceding the assessment date,
Yep.
and having 1 to 2 units.
Perfect.
Perfect.
I don't think that you want to use the should.
No.
Right.
Where's that?
Better word.
At the beginning?
How about must?
Yeah.
Shall, no.
Do it or
Shall.
don't get elected.
Could you read that?
Read
That's the
that-
beginning?
read that one
Yeah.
again?
Therefore, the legislature should create a new tax classification for short-term residential rentals, defined as residential units rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days, advertised as a short-term rental in the preceding assessment date.
So we're
And
asking,
having 1 to 2 units. Now I don't like this.
How
we are
about,
asking them to do something, they should do it, so maybe there's a better word than
Will.
how about,
Request of the
therefore, the
legislature
Cook
to.
County Board recommends that the legislature create,
recommends, yeah,
Yeah.
that's a better word.
recommends that the legislature create a separate class for short-term residential rentals as defined by, I kind of lost my wordsmithing right there at the last, but. you get the gist.
Molly's got it.
Are we requiring that, is this, must a property meet all of these
Yeah, do we need
qualifications?
ors or ands?
Or should it be or? Does it need to be residential, rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days, and advertised as a short-term rental in the year preceding, and 1 to 2 units?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Is, okay.
Inclusive.
So you could rent
You
your
could rent, but you
property
weren't
without
advertising.
advertising it and not fall under.
How does that work?
I think personally, I think those two should be or, and the last one should be and. So those two, you're renting it or advertising. I think it's an and or kind of a situation.
Yeah.
I hear what you're saying.
When
I
I
think
used
there are some
when I used to
properties-
write computer code, that was a very important distinction, the and or thing. You know, so that nobody can escape. There's not really a hole there. If you're renting it,
You're renting, yeah.
or you're advertising it, but you didn't rent it, you know, because nobody wanted to stay your place, or whatever it is, your intent is still to be a short-term rental. So it captures,
Well-
doing the and or for those two,
The
I
pla-
think captures the intent of how you want to use your property.
And where the rubber hits the road on this one is that host compliance will find those based on trolling the internet for advertising. That is precisely how they're gonna do their work for you, not driving around.
Mhm.
Exactly.
So the advertising is important, I think.
So we're
It
gonna
also
change
means
it
the
to
assessor's
or.
office doesn't need to investigate every property and find out whether it's been rented for less than 30 consecutive days.
yeah.
They can see the advertising and check the box.
Yep.
Okay, I'm okay with that.
So read it again.
Before I read it again, I'm now not liking the term residential units, because later in the sentence we say 1 to 2 units. You see. So
Oh, I see.
I'll read it again.
1 to 2
and listen to
residential
that
units in
part.
the beginning, maybe.
That's what I was gonna say, is
Yeah,
we should
just
move
put
the
the
number at the
one or
very
two up
beginning.
Good. Good.
It's a good solution.
That makes it simpler and shorter. Therefore, the Cook County Board recommends the legislature create a new tax classification for short-term residential rentals defined as 1 to 2 residential units rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days and/or advertised as a short-term rental in the year preceding the assessment date.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
I think that reads well.
I think they're gonna try and hire us all down at.
No, what's,
You
I
know,
I
I've worked
understand.
down there before, and I really do prefer it up here,
Yeah.
just saying.
I
It's a
need
nice
that
building
job,
they
so
have,
I'll
though.
take it.
Really nice building.
I know
And
they
s-
have an assistant director position coming up in property tax for that.
It
Yeah, you'd just be a shameless bureaucrat there.
is, I heard the culture's really bad. Just kidding. Is the and/or, is that too, I didn't follow all of that. I understand the importance of and or,
I think
but.
and or means the same as or.
No, no, it doesn't. No, it actually doesn't. It's, and, I mean, it's, you
Kind
know,
of like a blanket over both.
you want any combination there. You want, somebody's renting it, somebody's advertising it but not renting it. Or
Yeah.
somebody's,
You can't prove it.
you want, you know, so you want, they could say, yeah, well, it was advertised, but I never actually had anybody take me up on it. Their intent was still to rent it.
And you can't prove it, so.
But you can't-
One way or the other.
Right,
that
so the
covers it.
and/or is the most inclusive way to
There's
cover all
validity
those
too
instances.
in the thought of what host compliance is gonna do, and the data that the county collects from them.
Mhm.
You hired them for a year, so, or two. Jim's spot on, they're not gonna be knocking on doors, they're gonna be trolling for that
I
advertising.
think and/or is good because we've used it in my past.
Mhm.
Where it
It's a kind
becomes
of.
more inclusive
It is.
of the whole set rather than
I
the
don't think it does any
nitpick.
harm.
Yeah.
Okay,
No.
okay.
It's one of those kind of logic things, you know, that keeps you from being able to find a escape hole on one side or the other.
Yeah, I think it really closes it up for.
All I know is when we
exceptions.
didn't get that right when I was coding, the program didn't work the way we anticipated it did.
So it made a difference.
Yeah, it does make a difference.
Okay, so now we've defined the class.
Okay, so now what are we gonna ask them to do in the class? So the proposal that was out there from the chamber, that we documented here, I don't know that we've discussed it thoroughly, because it was kind of right at the end. Therefore, the Cook County Board recommends a local class rate of 1.25%, subject to RMV tax and exempt from state general tax.
I'm sorry, before we go there, you guys are gonna like this. The first recital, can we go back to that one? It's something just doesn't sit well with me, and I feel like it has to do with, maybe blame or not taking owner, or, just something about it.
Do you have a suggestion?
Because, well, not yet, but I'm just trying to throw out my thoughts, that it almost implies that the issue was created by this memo. And that isn't how I think we should start at least. Maybe we can include that in at some point, but I'd rather start it.
You could make it number
It's a
4.
good,
Yeah, I was.
Or
I
you
was
could
gonna
just say,
Yeah.
oh, I had it, now I lost it. This is in response to the uncertainty of the Minnesota, or it's in response to what we're trying to address in that first one.
Do we
So that
even
we
need,
didn't cause it, we're
Right.
just reacting to.
I was even wondering if we could just scratch it out completely.
Yeah,
Oh.
I'm kind of seeing where you're going, and I'm going down there to that fifth one, whereas the Department of Revenue has, I mean,
We say what we need to say.
Yeah.
yeah, and maybe we address the memo in that one.
well, you could just say, whereas there is great uncertainty
Yes.
in the short-term rental market, which
Hmm.
is just a
Kind of
state.
creates a beginning of, this is where we are with you, Department of.
Without the blame,
And-
because there
and-
is.
But
Really,
not
kind of
blame,
it's
but
like-
this
Get rid of the
is
hash
where we
phrase
are.
again.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that first statement just needs to be something that the rental market has changed over the last few years with.
There we go.
VRBOs and other, you know, something that says, this is different than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's not the Department of Revenue's fault or our fault, it's just changed. There's a, you know.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question? When this gets sent on and it's being absorbed by others that are trying to understand this resolution, I look at the first recital as being the truth. That memo of May 21st created uncertainty in the short-term rental market.
Yeah.
It's just the truth.
It
It's,
is,
uh,
but I wonder if it can be
Uncertainty before that,
combined.
which is what
I'm
I'm
sorry.
asking for.
I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I was just wondering if it could be combined with the one below that that says, whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue, that one
I
there
was-
has
It
created
could be-
uncertainty. But maybe we got here before that because of a change just in general in the environment of short-term rentals and how that market has changed.
So
And
at
that,
this point, though, the May 21st memo caused Bob to go for 183 primary use tests and caused the Lake County assessor to classify everything as commercial.
Commercial.
That's uncertainty.
that's true. I'm not saying take uncertainty out, I'm just saying put it in the lower one.
Yeah.
And
okay.
start with something that says, the world has changed since these classifications were made, and the classifications don't fit the current
Yes,
environment.
yes, that's what I'd
You can
rather
take number
focus
4 and
on.
make it first then?
No, I would take number 1 and add it to 4, and I would add something else that
One.
says,
One, two.
And a new one that
A new one
says,
that
whereas
says-
the short-term rental,
it's changed. The current environment has changed. It's
Vacation
different,
rental environment.
has changed from what it was 10, 20 years ago when there is not a classification that fits. And that's what's got us here.
Isn't that what number 4 says? Number 4 is, whereas the current Minnesota property tax system did not fully contemplate the short-term rental of residential properties. Isn't that exactly what it says?
Yeah, I agree with you, Jim. Maybe that
Move
could be
that
the
to the
first,
top.
put it up the top.
that's
Yes,
a good one.
And
yes.
does your,
And I just want to clarify on something Jim said, because there's other people watching. Lake County's determination, I think, is based off of 5 reviews in a calendar year. They're not just changing everything, but 5 reviews in a year is what I believe they're changing.
5 reviews. What do you mean by
5,
that?
if there were 5 reviews on a, like, VRBO website that said that there were 5 stays and people giving feedback, that's where they're making their determination, I
That is
believe.
interesting.
Insane.
That is interesting. I have a proposal for how we can combine paragraphs 1 and 4. So if you look at paragraph 4, I'm going to add some language. Whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue, in its memorandum classifying short-term rental property, May 21, 2019, issued to state assessors, has given county assessors wide latitude in determining primary use, which has led to inconsistent practices. No?
That memo did not give assessors wide latitude. Assessors have wide latitude. I would like to take the DOR, just DOR out of, I don't think there's any need to name the DOR.
That's where the letter came from.
I don't think we need to even reference that letter.
I believe that this actually started with the tax court case in 2014. And then the emergence of the vacation rentals, and then the memo.
I don't think we need to point fingers, and I don't think it helps us, to identify,
The actor who.
I think it's to our benefit just to identify what is the situation.
That's where I was going with the first thing. But I think ultimately, as a result of them trying to deal with the situation, they did it, put out this memo, which has created inconsistencies across the state.
Dave, I
So-
think we need to include the memo
They have-
because
yeah.
the legislator needs to understand why we're sending this letter.
Hmm.
And we're sending this
Hmm.
letter in response.
Hmm.
And
That's
I
what I'm
don't
saying,
think we
there's a
should go
starting.
back to 2014
No.
because they'd be like, why'd you wait 6 years?
Hmm.
But I think the letter
Time
needs.
flies.
Yeah, it's not finger pointing and it's not blaming, it's
Mhm.
just,
Mhm.
yeah,
The trigger.
yeah.
It's the trigger that's causing.
It's in response to.
so,
Can you send me, Molly, what you got so far? Having a harder time today because I don't have it in front of me.
can you reread what your version of paragraph number 5 ended up being, or what Molly has?
Molly has that, I think.
The original 5.
Do we want to just start from the top and have Molly read the recitals so we know what exactly we're looking at?
Can I hear the fifth one?
Okay, I'm first sending this to David.
Thank you.
What were my instructions? Read everything?
Or read
I
the
would
read
like
the
to hear it
fifth
from the
one.
top so I know where it fits
And
instead
Jim
of-
wants to hear
because
number
it's very
4.
different from
Jim
this.
wants to hear my version of number 4?
Mhm.
No, of
No,
5.
If, Molly, if you want to send it to me, I'll go and print copies for everybody so that we have the most current copy.
Yeah.
Why don't you just email it to me and I'll go do that?
I
You
think
guys
that
promise
the-
you're not gonna fight or do anything
Yeah.
along the way?
Well, do we want to do that right?
Or
We
you
want
wanna
to
take
print
a
it
few
now?
minute break? Let's take a 5-minute break.
Because I think that the Molly's version of 5 will influence what we do with the ones above it.
All right, email that to me and I'll print it, Molly, and let's take a 5-minute break.
Word, yeah,
I'll be right
because I
back.
need to see it all.
Heavy stuff for early morning.
Yeah.
I think that's what he,
I think I read that too.
I think that's what his interpretation
Just
is.
turn off election reviews.
Right.
It's super easy.
Yeah, he told me he had data collected for 2 years, but I don't believe that he did, because you can't go back in those calendars. You
So
can't look
instead of
at the
asking your vendors to write you
Once they
he
pass,
asks
they're
your
all
vendors
grayed
not
out.
to write you reviews.
So I don't know, but I think that's what he was using, and I know that was an interesting year.
Oh, it's, yeah, yeah. A lot of things.
Yeah, it really illustrates how
I don't know, I know some of the others are just changing.
Right, I know.
The
semantics, yeah.
But, you know, I could see, I'm sure we could see it far before I did.
And then you spend so much time on a particular paragraph, by the time you get to the next one, you're like, wait, should
Like
we
if I'm talking to
we just were
my
talking?
colleagues.
Yeah, but it's important, it's
Well, I
not
think
something
we are,
talk about.
we are hashing out a lot of the details that are in this thing. When they get it at the committee, they're gonna say, wow, these guys really thought this out.
So there's a benefit to being thorough in that case. That's how laws work. You know, room for variance is not allowed. Right.
Most of them haven't gotten into the Julian
Yeah.
Bottom gave it to me.
Yeah.
This is,
And I was just, I'm like, yeah.
that's how it is. State.
So that was what I worked on.
Well, because number one,
Yes.
it's statewide. So, right, yeah. Bigger budget, yeah. And seasonal is pretty consistently close to 1%, just because, I mean, if you look at it regardless of the value,
It's actually using pricing numbers.
Right. Yeah.
Never go But like,
On a hot day in the summer.
Or the base, which is.
yeah.
It's off the side of the train. It's like,
You got a new addition to the family.
Yeah, I got a new son.
I like this, he's a good
He's
guy.
awesome. Yeah, I was pretty stoked.
Oh, they're getting married?
Julian Mel got engaged on Monday, proposed on the gondola.
Did he?
Very
Yeah,
nice.
so that's
Easy.
Well, I was so like, you know, I gave him my old diamond, which is quite big, you know, like almost 20 carats. And Jay just was like,
But yeah, they definitely. Okay.
and it's really kind of not, you know, it's kind of my past, more wealthy life. Anyway, I gave it to Mal, like, I don't know, May or June. I said, here, I want the band back, I'm gonna take the diamond. When you're ready, if you are ready, are you gonna, and he's like, oh yeah, so here's the diamond. Go to Tours of the North and have them make it in. I said, "Hey." And they went right there and designed the ring.
Oh, they
Their tail on it.
And they need one, yeah. Right. Yeah.
The sleeves and the arms.
Thank you.
Might as well give these guys one too.
Rena, I thought you were, I passed you yesterday on the highway. I think it was you, you were going south. Yeah. I was going to Beaver Bay and I thought you were also going there subbing for Deb.
No.
Or for whatever reason, and I felt guilty passing, and then when I realized that you were going elsewhere, I came to peace with that pass.
Did you get passed by Myron too?
Yeah,
Me?
Myron's, yeah,
No.
Myron's like,
He passed all three of us last time we went down there.
Oh,
we were down there for Todd Landing. He went, I have passed. This one says to him,
Yesterday.
no, the time
Oh,
before. Yeah, it's like, whoa. Myron was, I was only going this fast, and she's like, you should have your speedometer checked. I don't know if it's like,
Yes, we did,
Because I was thinking, I have a double brewer.
oh, thank you. Thank you. But I think I figured it out. I did some math, and what I'd like to do is register as your guest
And,
for the conference. Because I'm registered as your guest.
all right.
And Myron.
We still got some work to do, so,
Considering.
and Linda, you have to leave at 9:30.
I need to, no later than
What else will be done? What else maybe will be done?
I think so. We're almost there.
Unless Dave keeps going back to the first line.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. You got 50 minutes, because I won't be in my room very much.
Is that all we got?
And we figured out my meeting starts in here.
Okay, are we ready? Are we ready to get going again, guys?
Let's go.
Let's go. So where are we at? Everybody's just gonna take a minute and review what we got, and are we gonna do it out loud, or how are we gonna do it?
Who's got the gavel?
Myron.
Do we need a gavel?
We're starting
do you
again.
really want it? No.
See, that's like.
Let's go. Attention, please. We'll resume the meeting.
So how would do you guys wanna just all take a second and read it to
Let's,
yourselves, or do we wanna go through it out loud, or?
I like the Christmas candles.
Yeah, they're nice, aren't they?
You just read it, Molly, and then we could just
Mhm.
all react and then just go to the next one.
Whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue's memorandum classifying short-term rental property, May 21st, 2019, issued
You just swore on
issued
camera.
to
I'm saying.
state, it was a pretty mediocre.
I know, still.
Issued to state assessors has created uncertainty in the short-term rental market. Whereas the short-term rental market is a critical part of Cook County's tourism economy. Whereas Cook County stands out as the county most reliant upon tourism for its economy in excess of 80%. Whereas the current Minnesota property tax system did not fully contemplate the short-term rental of residential properties. Whereas the Minnesota Department of Revenue has given county assessors wide latitude in determining primary use, which has led to inconsistent practices in classifying properties used for short-term rental across the state. Whereas the Cook County Board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce, whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners and recognizes that the Cook County Chamber has the same goal. Therefore, the Cook County Board has determined that the significance of short-term residential rental properties requires a separate class of taxation. And therefore, the Cook County Board recommends the legislature create a new tax classification for short-term residential rentals, defined as 1 to 2 residential units rented for periods of less than 30 consecutive days and/or advertised as a short-term rental in the year preceding the assessment date.
Wow, I like it a lot,
Yeah.
personally. It's very
Flows
clean.
nicely.
Reads
Yeah.
well.
Well, we haven't addressed this last.
We haven't
paragraph.
Yeah.
actually addressed what we're asking them to do, what
And-
the classification looks like.
Recommends a local class rate of 1.2 to 5%.
I thought we were maybe gonna switch some things around order-wise.
How did that sound to you?
Paragraph 1,
After,
paragraph
uh,
4.
After reading it.
After seeing the corrections?
There were some things I bothered still bothering me.
There's some wordsmithing that,
I would for example, in the first one, I would take out May 21, 2019, and then just go from property to property, comma, issued to state assessors May 21.
We
So
did
it's not
that.
in there twice.
Oh, okay, I didn't do
Yeah,
that.
She got that.
Okay,
Yep.
and take out, in number 3, take out for its economy.
Yep, got that.
All right, and then I'm gonna contradict myself from earlier, but I would take out the entire phrase, whereas Cook County Board has worked on a solution with Cook County Chamber of Commerce. Doesn't feel to me to fit there. And then on the next one, I would just leave the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners, period. And, yeah, and that's it. That would feel to me to flow much better.
I just out of curiosity, why,
The way
why
it-
do you want to take the Cook County Chamber of Commerce basically out of this resolution?
I didn't set out to do that, but as I'm reading it, and it's an iterative process, and the last iteration got me to that. We started out with, whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners, and then whereas the Cook County Board has worked on a solution with the Cook County Chamber of Commerce. Go ahead.
I don't mind you could take out the green, Christmas green, but keep the next recital. Whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair to all property owners and recognizes that the Cook County Chamber.
That's fine. That would be-
And the reason I like that is because I hope that we can find consensus here.
Yeah.
And I think that's good for the community too.
Okay.
And I hope that we can find consensus by common purpose
Yeah.
and goal. That way it doesn't make it look like we're pitting groups against each other, because I don't believe we are.
Right.
And so I think stating that is as important to the legislature as
fine.
it is to the, more important to the community.
Or how about
And it gives us more standing in St. Paul, which we'll need.
taking out the green, at the end of the red saying, and recognize that the Cook County Chamber has the same goal and have worked together towards a solution, had worked together, I'm just trying to
Toward finding a
combine.
solution, or to work
Whereas-
together toward finding a solution.
Whereas
Yes.
the Cook County Board and the Cook County Chamber have worked together to find a solution that is fair to all property owners.
Eric's worked
What I was gonna say is, so the one below the green, whereas the Cook County Board wishes to find a solution that is fair for all property owners and recognizes that the Cook County Chamber has the same goal. No, I'm sorry, what did you say?
I said, whereas the Cook County Board and the Cook County Chamber have worked together to find a solution that is fair to all property owners.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Is that right?
yeah, yeah, that's awesome.
Glad you didn't leave me.
I just
Oh,
got,
oh.
You don't like it?
Well, I was over here drafting and based on what you said, here's what I
Here's what you came up with, good.
Whereas the Cook County Board has worked with the Cook County Chamber to find a solution that is fair for all property.
That's exactly what I said.
Yes,
Is it? Okay.
yes,
That's
yes,
fine.
yes.
Fabulous.
All right, so I think, and maybe you guys can override me, because, you know, I don't really have a vote here, but I think it would be good for us to quit wordsmithing something that's pretty good
Yeah.
Yep.
and get down to the meat of this and make sure we find agreement on that, because I think that's
Okay.
harder than wordsmithing.
Okay.
Okay.
That's just my observation, so. Thank you, commissioners, about this proposal of 1.25, subject to RMV tax and exempt from state government. Take state general
I
tax.
think we should go to the information that Bob has passed out and discuss that.
So I got a request from Dave to give an example of a typical property. You know, the average, I think, we're just under 300,000, right around 300,000 in the value of these. So I picked this one, actually, it's the Bradingers, they came into our truth and taxation meeting. So I figured that would be a good one to use as an example. Just a disclosure, the value there of 277.1 was adjusted last year, so this is representative of the chart and the estimates that I put together before that change happened, but it's still reflective of a property at 277.1 in Pompey.
Which page are we on?
Oh, the
Just the very first, yeah. So,
Eagle's Nest.
the first column shows the different tax rates at the different classifications. The 1.25 without state general fund, that's essentially the residential non-homestead rate. Just didn't word it that way. The second column shows, based on that starting rate, how many nights it would take to rent to cover that tax bill. The effective tax rate, which I think is a big part of this discussion, that I discussed with Ginny yesterday and Myron. Effective tax rates are what's used to measure the property tax bill across the state. You know, that's how counties make comparisons to each other and, you know, see where your taxes are at. Then there's the percentage increase, basing it off of seasonal rec, which I think we've established was the wrong classification. I also could have done one, you know, how much lower is this than commercial, which would have been the exact opposite. And then these last three columns show of the total tax bill. This isn't in addition to the tax bill, this is part of that total tax bill. How much goes to the state general, how much is paid into the referendum market value tax, and then an estimate of fiscal disparities, which fiscal disparities is complex, and this would be based off of the first year, and the formula would completely change in the following year because of the growth in commercial. So just an example that it only affects commercial classification, and that 2,500, I believe, goes into the pool, and I believe we get some of that back, right, Brady?
Yeah, they're just taxing your entire value at the higher rate, but the part of your rate stays here.
Okay.
I got a question about the nights to cover.
Thank you, I was going there too.
What is that, I mean, how is that calculated?
So basically, if it's 275 a night, the lowest rate, that's how many nights it would take at 275 to cover that.
Gross?
I don't,
Like, I think that's
I mean,
making
it's just a pretty general measurement.
I don't think it
Let's
should
make
be
some
that.
big assumptions, I think.
I think it does too, because it draws us into what it covers just to cover the taxes. And we all know what it costs to
It's just
maintain a home.
information to provide to the commissioners.
All right, well, let's just,
Okay.
let's just
Thank you.
take that out of the conversation.
If this gets shared beyond here, I would really want that nights to cover to be not included. It doesn't need to be included, because that's such a variable. 275, there's many places that rent for way less than that, and that, like you said, there's too
This
many
is a
variables
It's just on this property.
Case study information to the commissioners that I was asked to
on that
provide.
case study. Right, it's calling in the case study.
Well, my concern was the assumptions of what it costs to operate versus just gross. I don't think it's fair to just say your gross is what's gonna cover it. Like you get, net, if you knew net, but then you're getting down into businesses and
Right.
like the individual business plans or individual costs, and I
Let's-
just think there's,
Let's
yeah.
just take it,
Yeah.
let's just take it out of the discussion.
Okay,
Thank
yeah.
you.
I think you said that.
I did, but you kept
Thank you.
discussing it.
Weird.
So I just took my pen and crossed it out.
Okay.
I would highly recommend that, because the rest of it is much more,
Very valuable information.
it is.
Thank you.
One thing I was hoping for, and I'm sorry if I didn't make it clear, was I was hoping to look at the 1.5 without the state general fund.
Without it.
But we can,
Essentially,
we
you
can
back
do
it out
that.
with that 860.
Yeah, we can do that, so, thank you for putting this together.
Yep, so it would be 3,900 somewhere there.
Okay,
We're gonna change the percent increase also.
Yeah.
So the portion that comes to the county is the R&D.
That's towards the school, what Jim was calling an override, so that's what the voter approved referendums.
Okay.
If you look at the first two, the seasonal rec compared to the 1.25 without state general fund, you can see that the tax bill went up by a little over $500. And 481 stopped going to the state, so in increasing the tax bill $500, it kind of got an extra $1,000 because it shifted where it was going.
Speaking as a school board member, which is really out of my lane right here in the spot, this is one of the things that's caused schools to have so much trouble, is when they took
Yeah.
that
They-
amount out of the seasonal rec.
They should never have taken it out.
Completely changed all the formulas for
And
schools.
and
But
Baca
not
said that as
having-
well, that it was a real mistake.
But not having what comes to the county portion on here, I lose where the fairness to all is.
What do you, I'm sorry, what comes to
Out
the
of
county?
RMV, the county gets, well, I guess it doesn't, county doesn't get all of the RMV. The RMV is specific to.
To the schools.
Yeah.
No, that's right. I'm just saying, as a school board member, that RMV thing, you look at seasonal
Yeah.
rec and you see how much
Yeah. the RMV
revenue
is
is lost
fine,
for our
but I mean,
schools.
just by changing from 1.25 to 1.5, that comes to the county.
So,
1.0 to 1.25.
so I'm really very ignorant on this stuff, but is what comes to the county, the total tax bill minus what goes to state general and what goes to fiscal disparities and what goes to RMV?
Yep.
Okay, so, okay.
And calculate.
So you can-
RMD stays.
And I think
But
Brady.
RMV goes to the school.
Right.
Right.
Right. Brady, you can elaborate a
But I
little
meant
further.
county government.
Even at the NTC, the local capacity, only a part of that's for the county, and some of it goes to the
Oh, sure.
townships and.
Yeah, everything else, you'll have the town, city, fire departments.
Yeah.
The RMV.
So, I mean, it gets
No,
way too
of
in
the
the weeds.
regular net tax capacity, so that's only part of that.
Oh, I see.
County, anyway.
It gets
The
way,
big-
way into the weeds. I think
It
this
gets
is a
into the
general
weeds,
picture.
but when Dave makes the suggestion to change 1.25 to 1.5, it matters.
Can I suggest that you pull up the tax parcel report on this particular property? It will show you exactly where all of it goes.
Yes.
Hmm.
The tax statement for 2020, you can do it on your, it's all online.
Do you want me to do that now, or what are we even asking? I mean,
It's fine, let's just
Okay.
move on and
Yeah.
do a determination.
Yeah.
I can figure what I need to know over here by myself and look up the.
There you go. So, yeah, so I think it is important to know that in all of this up and down, what actually happens to our
Mhm.
tax capacity.
So the very, very last page addresses for the actual capacity change. For 2019, it looked like our tax capacity was about 18,030,000. And each step that this would go up, from seasonal rec going to the residential non-homestead, it went up about 390,000. And if it went from residential non-homestead up to the 1.5, it would go up another 406,000. Pretty general calculations, what that means is about 2.2% of the tax capacity, which Brady, do you know how that breaks down into a levy percentage?
5%?
I think it's like, yeah, 4.4.
4.4, yeah.
Does it work
It's
that
roughly
way?
100,000 is a percent.
Right,
Yeah.
our levy's 10 million this year,
Yep.
so.
So roughly
But tax capacity isn't budgeted.
No, but that's how you figure out the
The
percentage
calculation.
change, yeah.
So Brady's kind of the expert on what the actual levy impact would be.
We're gonna look to you on this one, Brady.
Well, I'm not gonna do it here.
Maybe, do you want to comment on that, or could I ask it in a different way? Maybe.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think what I was interested in is, let's just take 1.25 as an example, or 1.5. What impact would that have on our tax capacity as far as levy? In other words, if it, one compared to the other, what benefit would that be to our assessed valuation in regards to it?
Well, it's gonna
Example.
shift more of the taxes again to the short-term rental and away
Right.
from the other properties.
And then so.
You'd have to actually do the calculations to tell you how much.
You
I don't
can't
have-
estimate that.
I'm not gonna estimate it here. But,
I can give you a.
But you had a pretty good example this year.
Last year.
Right.
Because we went from 1 to 1.25, so it'd be a similar increase, another
It was about
0.25.
300,000.
I think it would be about half of what we saw last year, because last year we had a
You
lot
had
more
other
involved.
things
So I
involved.
think, I would rough estimate, say 2 to 3%, 3% maybe at the most.
something like that.
So that would mean that looking forward, if we had a levy in the county, let's say, whatever it is, that this figure would impact on how much more of an effect of our levy tax rate would have on property owners. In other words, last year, because of our assessed increased valuation, we had less impact at a certain level with the other tax
So it
payers.
was spread.
Because it was,
Spread over
So
more.
it's spread to the
Spread over
short-term
more, so
rentals.
that's what I'm trying to get at.
It does. You're just gonna have this,
Would it
another
give us a
similar
2%
effect.
kind of,
That's what.
Yeah, so essentially, to put it in the most simple terms is, if this was a 2% wash or a 3% wash, I wouldn't call it a wash.
Well, yeah.
Let's just say it amounts to 2 or 3%. That burden, if you only had a 2 or 3% levy increase, wishful to hopeful, that 2%, 3% levy increase would be covered or paid for by the change in the short-term rentals, and everyone else's bill would essentially remain the same as it was last year. That's as simple as it can get. It's pretty complex, and there's a number of other moving
Yeah,
pieces.
that's close enough
Yeah.
for this.
if it was 1.25, what would that be approximately?
So essentially, if it was 1.25, it would just remain the same as the level.
Because that's where it is now.
That's where it is now.
Yep.
1.25 without state demo. That's exactly what you have this year.
That's exactly what this new class.
The other piece of what you were asking though is it gets really tricky because it is all iterative. And the warnings we're getting from the people in the business is that the increase to, if you add in the state minimum tax and you're getting in a neighborhood of a 40% increase, or if you go to 1.5, the iteration is that it reduces your market value over time, which reduces your tax capacity, which means you cannot take what you get this year or next year and assume that you will always get that out of it. It does have long-term impacts on what you will get.
Can you repeat that? As far as the, I'm sorry?
It's on here. That's the sheet that we're looking at.
No, it's not the long.
No, yeah, the long game. That's what I'm,
Yeah.
can you repeat about the, what decreases the market value?
Shifting the
People
use
in
of the
the
property.
industry
Yeah,
working with short-term rental housing
Yep.
has said that an increase of 1.25 plus state general
mm-hmm,
yields about a 45% property tax increase.
mm-hmm,
In the half of that market that is standalone cabins and homes,
mm-hmm.
the concern is that they will, a
Pull.
lot of them will pull
Yep,
out of
yep.
the market.
Yep,
The concern with the condominiums and townhomes, however, is that they are not in good shape right now. They need a lot of reinvestment.
yeah,
And that a 43% property tax increase, will cause their market value to continue to decline. Dennis provided a long list of condominiums, some of them up at Caribou Highlands that are down even in the $60,000, $70,000 range now. They've lost market value because they're not in very good shape. And what Dennis is saying is that if you do a 45% increase, you're just gonna continue that downward cycle of the market value will go down, the property taxes will go up as a percent, but there will be no reinvestment, and over time, you're gonna continue to lose market value, which means you lose tax capacity. So you're robbing the short-term, or you're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're getting a short-term Paul, but the Peter on the long-term isn't very good. That's what they're warning of, with a 40 to 45% increase.
Yes, Commissioner.
This is the exact same argument that we have heard from residential homeowners since I've been elected. You continue to raise my taxes, I can't afford to live here, I will have to leave, and I can't do the maintenance and repairs to my house.
It is.
You look at Susan Kent's house, the new minority leader. She bought it on 36 Turnagain Trail. It's off of the Mink Ranch Road. The net into that new property is above $600,000. She paid $385,000 for it. those properties have not recovered from the recession yet. Those market values are not recovered yet, and this is gonna drive them further down. It's not exactly, you know,
And private homeowners have the same thing, some private homeowners have not recovered either.
Well, one thing private homeowners don't have is association fees. And I'm just
Some
wondering
do.
if that's kind of killing some
My
areas
grandma has an
too.
association fee.
So I'm
I
just-
think we're getting into the weeds when we start
Yep.
talking about that. I think we need to still really think futuristic here.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true, I mean, blighted properties are blighted properties, and if we don't be thoughtful and careful about this decision right now, Jim's exactly right. If, we include that, go to 1.5 and it goes up to 44%, that stops.
But Heidi's right as well.
I agree.
no, I
And-
disagree,
and-
because when Heidi's talking about a levy increase, that applies to all the properties.
Right.
That's, all of us do that, and we were the ones who stood up here and took all the shit for saying you had to do the 22. So it's not like we oppose property tax increases.
But the
But
argument is
you're
the
selecting
same.
you're selecting a subset. You're selecting a subset of 600 units and saying that they will get a 40 to 45% property tax.
I haven't proposed anything, but I think Heidi makes a good point, Jim, that, and whether it's apples to apples or not, that's the way it will be perceived in the community. We've said the same thing. The people come in here and say, I can't pay this, I can't improve my house, I can't do this if you do that, which is a parallel argument that you're making about short-term rental people. It may not be apples to apples, but I think that it's at least a point of view that when we say we want to be fair to everybody, we need to at least consider how that plays.
And I'm not arguing that you need to leave the state general in, I'm just saying that that is the same struggles that we hear across the board when we're looking at fairness. And we don't fire employees and reduce the levy because we have 40 homeowners that can't afford to fix their roof or insulate their house. We have to do what's best and fair across the board. Dave, go ahead, I'm done.
Well, wait, you might have my answer. Did you do the math on the 1.5 without the SGF? Or can we do that? Sorry for my
It's
ineptitude.
36% increase.
Instead of 40, or instead of 66.
But I think part of why the revenue reached
On the
out to
case.
us is because when we went to the non-residential, they lost the state general 481
I was encouraged by what,
on this one.
yeah, I was encouraged by kind of the loose word of being open to not.
They didn't lose the money. The state never loses on the state general. The state general tax is an appropriated amount, and then it is divided across all the properties in the pool. So if you take these out, it means the ones that are in the pool, remaining in the pool, go up. The arguments for taking them out are several. The first one is that when this tax was established, it applied to two categories of property, commercial and seasonal. You are removing these properties from seasonal. Doesn't matter if they rent for 1 day or 365 days, they're in this tax pool. So you're taking them out of that.
And the commercial has to pick it up.
The commercial doesn't have to pick anything up. You're
Well,
not,
it's spread out to the commercial.
No, we
And
spread to the
seasonal.
other seasonal. The seasonal and the commercial are two different appropriations.
Okay.
Oh,
So it'll be
okay,
spread
oh,
to the
okay,
seasonal.
thank you.
Yeah.
That's very
So that
helpful.
means our seasonal homeowners will carry more of the burden.
It's statewide, so I mean,
It's
now,
That's
if
helpful.
everything in the state switches, then it might be more of an impact, but
you're talking really a relatively small amount. The state general tax for commercial is in the neighborhood of $875 million a year. The statewide for seasonal is about $45 million. It's a relatively small amount across the state.
Even if it's $1, we're saying we want to be fair and not have a negative impact on anyone.
So, you said it was 36% at 1.5 and no SGF?
That was my calculation on the case study one. Yeah.
Okay, and then,
You do math too?
Yep.
and then how about 1.35 with no SGF.
Dave, all the tax codes are pretty much 1.2, and 1.5. We go 1.35 or.
Is that?
Is that too much, that's too hard for
I
you?
mean, there isn't any class codes that have a 1.35 rate. I did in the other charts here do the 1.35 because you guys had asked for that.
Yeah.
But it didn't break out the state general fund. Essentially, I can somewhat figure it out. Because at 1.35, that's a class rate, you multiply that by the value and then multiply it by the local rate, which is depending on the Schroeder top.
So it's, if you multiply it by the value on case study one, it's $3,741.
So what, are we looking for the state general if it was 1.35?
No state general. I don't care anything about the state general.
Okay.
I want to know the 1.35 with no state general.
I don't know what to subtract if it has.
That's where I started getting caught up. I was like, I better just ask. Yes.
I have to pack up, sorry, I have another meeting at 10. I just want to keep in our focus that the higher tax rate, what we talked about, and properties not being able to reinvest, properties that will drop off of being lodging opportunities. We have to keep that optic in mind of us and our tourism economy. So I just want to make sure you're remembering that if, X number of rentals drop off, it's X number of jobs that drop off too. It's X number of people still being able to reinvest and live in Cook County. And I think we forget that because we're at this starting gate of trying to describe this, but I really think it's important that we think long-term.
Why would you take that risk to provide additional dollars to the state?
Well, what?
The state general tax goes to St. Paul.
Yeah, I don't want that.
Yeah.
I don't want anything to do with that.
They've just-
What I'm trying to figure out is the percent increase to properties between 1.25, 1.35, 1.5. But I guess I also need to ask, is 1.35 just not even an option? Is that just dumb?
Anything,
option.
anything can be proposed.
That's what but I just didn't know the likelihood
It
of,
makes it more confusing.
it's just another number to plug in. I mean, it's a good
problem-
compromise is what,
The problem is
is
no
what I'm
one's-
reading.
No one has plugged that in.
Right.
Anywhere else, so it's probably gonna be, pick something, one or the other.
Well, I don't know. That's why I'm asking. I don't know.
And I think the other issue here, and I'm not advocating one or the other, but we have one of the lowest rates in the state.
So
Lowest rates of.
second page of my packet here, it's effective tax rates, and that's, like I say, the measurement. When Cook County residents are comparing their tax bill to Lake County residents, this is like where it ends up, the discussion. And I give averages for the state in 2016, it's the most up-to-date info we can get. So seasonal rec average effective tax rate is like 1.01%. Homestead is 1.28. That's actually higher than some of these different proposed classifications. Residential non-homestead 1.48, apartments 1.73. And in 2016, a fact that I think is interesting considering a lot of these owners are down in Twin Cities, Minneapolis's homestead effective tax rate is 1.7 in 2016, 1.74 in St. Paul on a homestead property. Every one of these proposed rates is lower than that. So a taxpayer in the cities, homestead would be taxed at a higher rate than their rental property in Cook County.
Way not apples to apples. When I owned a residence in Minneapolis, in my property taxes, I paid for my solid waste collection, I paid for a professional fire department whose closest station was 10 blocks from my house. There are all sorts of things that make a tax comparison between Minneapolis and rural Cook County not appropriate.
Okay, we've got 15 minutes, so I want to stop getting into the weeds and arguing. I want us to pick. It's up to us to decide, 1.25, 1.35, or 1.5.
And I did count the state general on a 1.35, it was like $760. I mean, it's gonna be between the 1.5 and 1.25.
Well, that's why I was asking for the 1.5 without the SGF, because then I could compare and what would be in between.
So-
One other thing to keep in mind is that when these were seasonal rec, they didn't pay the local levy overrides. They did pay the state general tax. When Bob and Todd moved them to residential non-homestead, they picked up the local levy and dropped the state general. I think that for us, that is the preferable thing, but it's not common at all that they pay both.
I don't think anyone is proposing the SGF. I mean,
Okay.
should we do a poll? Or,
Well,
right,
what
see
can we
what
do about it? I guess? What can we do
well,
about
we
it?
gotta present our ideal. Our ideal, I think, is not to have the SGF be a factor in this at all.
So that should be included in our whereas.
So,
It is at the
so
very
I'm
end.
gonna,
Very end.
we're proposing an ideal, but let's say we did 1.5 without SGF. And the state comes back and goes, we like your 1.5 though, but we're gonna leave the SGF.
Right, that's the risk here.
That's a
Yeah.
risk.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
for
a
sure,
risk.
for
And
sure.
I don't know how the state
Right.
really, I mean, you're hearing from Judy Erickson that it's probably not a problem and people don't see that as an issue, but
Well,
I
Actually,
mean-
Hospitality Minnesota, when these rates were presented to them, they supported the 1.25, but they didn't support 1.5.
Okay, Jim, no offense, I'd like to hear from the commissioners, because we have to make
Yes.
this decision, and we literally
Right.
have 15 minutes. There are gonna be people walking in here for the next meeting in the next 5
And,
minutes.
Is there- there's no-
and this is not your decision alone. Carrying this to St. Paul requires our agreement as well.
This is our
This
resolution.
all right, good luck taking it down there.
I think we've gotten to a rough spot here. I think what Heidi is saying is that we're trying to get a conclusion here, and we certainly value your input, but in order for our conclusion, we need to get a consensus. And,
Okay.
I mean, I'm not saying your role
Right,
is.
but I'm saying that if it's 1.5, we will not be taking the resolution forward. You can do what you want, but we won't be doing it.
I appreciate that info, maybe not the tone.
Right.
But I do appreciate it.
But if we're gonna be blunt about.
So
Thank you.
before you
Yeah.
guys do move
Yeah.
forward with the discussion, I just want to say that the fear is that these go on commercial next year. I mean, that's the fear. That's why we're here.
Yeah, I think
So
that
if we
also
don't
is
take
gonna be-
something to St. Paul, that's what it could do
Right.
next
I
year.
think that's a very realistic, something to consider,
Mhm.
Thanks, Bob.
that commercial is ultimately.
All right, now, I'm gonna
The
just say,
alternative.
all right, next part, commissioners only now.
Oh, I was gonna ask one last question.
All right, one last question.
How does 1.35 sit?
I think that's just a technical question of why that's never been part of this.
Well, I didn't mean like with the state, but with your representation.
What's the percentage increase?
It's in between, well, that's, I guess, what I was wondering.
There is all the charts past this case study should have a 1.35 representation.
But it includes the SGF. is-
Yeah, it does, and I mean, like I say, on 250, it's gonna be roughly $750. So if you look at the 250 rate, 1.35, it would be like $2,900 for the overall tax bill, somewhere in there.
Yeah, you've got it
But the state general isn't.
here. Yeah.
Right, that's the part I wanted.
I removed the state general. I have 38% increases for
Yeah, that's high.
So 1.25 without the SGF is 16, and 1.35 is 38? And that's what and 1.5 I think was 30, huh?
40, isn't it 40%?
No, that was 1.25 plus the state general.
Yeah, I was asking about the 1.5 without the, this is many more than one question, but this is where I was trying to find a compromise is 1.35, I want to know what that means, percent increase without the SGF. I guess we can make motions here.
We can't make motions.
Oh, we can't make
We're
motions?
making motions on the 11th.
I don't
So if
think-
you want, you could have those numbers on the 11th.
What I'm asking is if we could get a raise of hands that we don't want the SGF included in our proposal. I do not want the SGF included in our proposal. Huh?
I just don't quite understand how that, I'd have to be convinced of how that impacts us, because it seems like it's far more general than this specific thing. But help me
It
with that.
impacts it because the chamber won't take our resolution to the legislators.
So,
Yeah, I'm not for or against it. I guess, what is the intent of this resolution? That would then, have we stated that clearly? That all of our assumptions then going forward would be based upon not having that?
Right, SGF.
So have we stated that clearly here?
The last line defines that it's subject to the RMV and exempt from the state general tax.
So you're, So
but we
how
haven't
would we
really made
reword
that
it?
case for that in our,
Yeah.
whereas is up to that point, I think is what
That's a good point.
Myron is saying. We suddenly say, we need this class, we need to do this, and all of a sudden
we're thrown, yeah.
we throw something else in there. So we
Yeah.
probably need to back up and say,
Yeah.
what's the rationale for
Yep,
that?
yep, I
So
agree.
the whereas would be that the RMV supports our community and exempts the state general tax.
But that's not fully true, RMV doesn't exempt state.
No, you can have both.
No, but we want a statement that says this is why we're doing it that way, because we want to support the
Well,
local.
One thing that I heard Mr. Boyd say is that it would be very rare for, it's pretty rare for a classification to have both.
There, I think there's only a
state
couple.
general. So
Right.
it would be creating a class that is an oddball.
And that's how I want to word that into a whereas.
Ah,
What
yeah,
is
good point.
Yes.
4C1 pay into the referenda?
Thank God after 7 years Molly understands what I mean and not what I say.
Yeah.
So 4C1 is one of the very few that pays into all three pools. The sister classification of 4CC1.
But,
And I will say,
the
to
first
Jim,
$100,000 is at the 1% rate, so apples to apples is very difficult here.
to Jim's point of, if we, obviously the rate hasn't been established, but if it ended up that the rate proposal was 1 1/4, paying into referenda and not state general, essentially what you're doing is creating another class that's the exact same as residential non-homestead. And why wouldn't the argument just be that these are residential non-homestead?
Because you got a letter stating they need to be commercial.
Right?
We thought you were brilliant when you put them in residential non-homestead.
Yeah.
I've got an.
So
Okay,
do we
so
want a
going forward,
resolution that says whereas we're the smartest county in
Let's
the
just
state?
clarify this. I think that from what Jim is saying, you're hanging on 1.25, and then we couldn't agree. So I think as we bring this forward to the board, then we've got your position and we're gonna have to take ours.
Well, that's not one,
Would that be, I'm just looking at process and how to proceed.
we didn't get an answer on a 1.35.
You
And
said no.
Oh,
No, I didn't say
Oh.
no, I just.
He said, "What is it?"
I don't know.
yeah, yeah, we want to know what the percent increase is on that.
And we need the whereas statement to explain why we're not going to state general if we're not.
I mean, I throw a wrench in this whole thing.
No.
Is you could adjust the state general percentage. Class rate.
Why?
You could, you could.
But why?
I don't know, I
So that
guess.
we leave it in?
Well, and then
Why?
I'm just saying, I didn't know if we had to completely decided we were throwing that out. I think one person said that they didn't want to see that in there, but,
That was me.
yeah. And if, the rest of the commissioners felt like, they don't want to pull that out on the risk that this doesn't get any traction, you could adjust that rate. Now, it's uncommon. If you look, there's only a couple where the state general rate is less than the local rate on that capacity rate
The
calculation.
first 76,000 of the seasonal rec is 0.4.
Yep, and I think there's one other one that might have an adjustment to the state general rate, but that's something to consider. Anything you guys want for numbers wise for your meeting Tuesday, I can certainly prepare. Like if you want the 135 without state general in it, I can calculate, in fact, I can have that to you in about 10 minutes. And anything else.
1.5 without the SGF, but also.
So that's in the first representation, you can just minus out the state general.
Oh, okay.
The thing that's really disappointing to me is that the thing that seems uppermost in your mind is how many bucks we get out of it. And that doesn't seem to me like that's so.
Not for me.
That,
No, with all these whereases, not at all.
it, where I think where the dollars matter is how it's going to affect everyone. That's where it matters. So that's where it's in my mind is, it is relevant, but it's not the.
Well, I think we're looking for fairness and we're looking to the future. We don't know.
And there's a balance there, yeah.
Yeah, and we have uncertainty, I don't wanna go to the 5 lot thing, but that's another thing we have to consider. When we make these decisions, we gotta look long-term.
So Dave, 1.5 is a $600 increase from 1.25 on case study one.
And that percentage, I think, is that 36%?
So,
Roughly.
Yep, I had that.
so what I'm understanding in going to our next board meeting is that we'll bring this to the board, and we don't know where you're at yet. And we're going to take a look at that percent. And so I guess it's up to you then how you're gonna respond to that and whether we send it or not. And I just wanna have a fair process and
Right.
logical
And we were saying that,
and respect, you know.
yeah, and we were saying that we were looking for an increase in the neighborhood of what we now have, 15 to 20, and that going up to 40 to 45 was going to be very difficult.
And it's 1.5.
Hmm?
And that was the 1.5.
1.5 is 36%.
Yeah, 1.5 or,
Exempt it from
yeah.
this,
We would like to see you come out where you're exactly the same as you are this year, exactly. You keep the tax capacity you gain, there wouldn't be any more, except for the long term, and if you accept our argument that this is the best way to help assure improvements of properties and increases in market value that will also affect your future tax capacity in terms of market value. Whereas we're feared that an increase in the 40% rate.
I understand where you're coming from.
Causes-
We have to go on that. So is that fair? Bob, you'll have some information for us at this next meeting, and
So we
then
just,
can we agree up to this point?
up to the bottom line.
Um,
Yeah. We
Nothing
do
that
have a whereas
matters.
that says why we're gonna not include
I
the
have a
beaches.
suggestion for that.
Yep.
Good.
Here's that little paragraph, as long as I have my facts straight, I'm not sure I do. So let me just read it to you. Properties, so after the definition paragraph where we say, here's what we're gonna put in this new class tax classification. The next paragraph is a new one, and it would say, properties falling into this new definition were previously classified by the Cook County Assessor as residential recreational properties, is that right?
Non-homestead.
Non-homestead.
Residential non-homestead properties, a class that pays into the RMV and is exempt from state general tax.
Yes.
I don't, can I caution against that though? Because the whole purpose of the May 21st memo was to tell the assessors, you can't do that. So,
The whole purpose was to tell us we couldn't use that class, but we still need to define why we don't support paying the state general tax on this.
And one more thing, you made a statement at our committee of the whole meeting that if we operate with where we're at right now, we'll see a decrease in our assessed value. I can't remember the exact words, but when we were
Tax
talking about the
capacity.
tax capacity, that we had a gain on our last levy, but if we move this forward, we would not have that gain.
So, no, I mean, we changed them to residential non-homestead. If nothing happens, you are right, because some of them will go back to seasonal rec, then we would lose some of that capacity when that happens. So, yeah, that is a true statement, that if nothing happens, if this doesn't pass and it's not retro or, whatnot, the very different situations where that could happen, we could lose some tax capacity from
You
where
said
we're at
like about
this year.
2% or something.
Yeah.
you said most, and you're,
Well, and yeah, I mean, the primary use determination, I haven't really fully analyzed it, so I can't give you a specific number, but some will go commercial, which will increase capacities, and some will go to residential, or seasonal recreational back to where they were, so, yeah, I mean, that is a very real situation that we have on our hands. I just want to, again, say that commercial is the road they're on right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the issue is can we get something that will work and everyone can agree to, or then we're just back to commercial. Where nothing happens.
Is there some, maybe there's, the board has a resolution that is, you know, kind of like a Venn diagram, overlaps with most of your resolution.
Yeah.
And so the board has a stance on, these are the things that we think are valuable, and this is what we agree to in this. And then, you know, you go down there, and as you alluded to, there's sausage making or whatever else. That's not necessarily what the board has proposed. And we know that things take on a life of their own down there. I really, I guess I was surprised. They'd say, yeah, if you don't agree with us, then we're not taking this there. That there's maybe some broader kind of agreement that we can have,
Well,
knowing that the board is always trying to keep all taxpayers in front of it without this kind of, I mean, do we have to be in lockstep on
well, wait a
everything?
minute though, Rena, we came in with, we built up, your current policy, as Bob has said, if nothing happens, the 183-day primary use test becomes functional on assessments, or on taxes for 2021.
It's true, and we know that people aren't being necessarily upfront with us about self-reporting too, so that's.
Well, I don't know what to do with that statement, but that is your policy. He put it in place.
Yep.
Unless something happens. We tried to build off that and came in with a fairly complicated proposal, which is, we don't want commercial, so we proposed this new class that if they go over 183 days, they don't fall all the way to commercial, they fall to this new rate similar to this. And we also tried to rope in the condominiums to the 41, so they'd be part of the seasonal resort. That was our initial proposal. We knew you weren't going to go for that. I think that we were even told that you were going for something very similar to the 1.25 new class that Bob put together for our meeting on January 6th. But what I'm telling you isn't that we haven't moved, we did. If these properties, most of them, when Bob appeared before the committee of the whole, he told you that based on the surveys, most of them would return to seasonal rec. So that nothing happens, they return to seasonal rec. We're saying we'll take them up to 125, make them pay the local levy override, but exempt them from the state general tax. That's not no movement. We're not setting our heels and saying we're going to dictate terms. We came in here at the start of this process at our last work session saying to you, we're not wedded to any of the verbiage in the resolution, and let's start talking at 1.25, not what was in our original resolution. So it's not as if we weren't open to compromise. But, and I thought that our compromise was also to point out that you get to keep your tax capacity, you get to avoid the yearly surveys that you wanted to avoid. So I don't, we thought we were moving.
If I may, just imagine you were having this conversation in Lake County. It wouldn't be a compromise going up to 1.
Stop this. Stop this notion that we are starting a commercial and anything we get under commercial is a gain. Please, we're not a commercial. We're at seasonal recreational. That is your policy
For one,
for next year.
right next year, one.
Yeah.
Is there another room for the next committee, or are we able to?
I
Well,
think we can bring it forward to the board meeting, or if we enjoy it.
And Bob can supply some more.
Yep, so we want to see all the rates without state general, including 1.35.
Yeah,
Please.
can you truly get that in 10 minutes?
Yep.
Because I think it might be valuable for Jim to see that 1.35.
Proposed paragraph.
And I'll stand between you two.
So I did check the email that you sent me, and it was 1 1/4 and 1 1/2, and the referenda and the RFP. So I thought I'd covered all bases, but I'll get
Okay,
that one.
Molly, should we meet and talk about this?
But I just want to.
DC thing, or-
Sure.
I guess I have to meet with
Yeah,
Brady
where is it
anyway,
at?
but
Right.
All right, I'll have
Done a
that
little
sent
work.
over to you guys.